This year's submissions will close in 4 weeks' time on the 18th of October, and we will put in the Eventbrite description in the chat box if any of you are yet to sign up. We'll remind you, you need to be an RIAS student member to join. That is free. There was a QR code, which hopefully you saw on the holding slide, and we'll make that available again for anyone who hasn't yet signed up. In the build up to these awards, we've invited our 3 winners from last year, Inka, Karlis and Sam, to present their projects to you. There'll be some time for Q&A at the end with our speakers, and we'll also hear from our president, Stewart, who was one of last year's judges, who will tell you a little bit about the thought process that went on last year and maybe share some tips for you for this year. This session will also be recorded, and we'll share that with you later in the week and make it available through our social media. Please feel free to use the chat box throughout the session, and we'll get to your questions at the end of our speakers. So first up, I'd like to introduce Inka, who is a student from Asala and winner of the A&DS Award for Best Third Year Student. Public housing estates often face physical and social intertwined challenges, and Inka's project, Common Ground, Leith, introduces a town hall to the fragmented New Kirkgate development with a programme of intersecting the local government and grassroots movements that could be an asset to the community and enhance the lives of those people. The Architecture and Design Scotland Award for Best Third Year Project is only open to third year students. It's an individual prize, but if students are working in groups, you can submit that group work individually, and we'll mark your aspect of it. I'll hand over to Inka now, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, first of all. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully, there we go.
Perfect.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'll just go ahead and present my project, which is my final year undergrad project. As introduced, it's called Common Ground Leith, and it's very obviously located in Leith in Edinburgh. And it's a project for a town hall that deals with questions of public space and communal gathering and how to make a long-lasting positive impact, like socially and architecturally, essentially. And I shall elaborate on that further as I go on with the presentation. So the project itself sits in a kind of particular area of Leith, which is bound by several tower blocks, which are part of a modernist redevelopment of the area. And they sort of define the character of this kind of part of Leith and this neighborhood. And the neighborhood faces challenges that are sort of common among public housing estates, such as unwelcoming landscaping and a lack of shared amenities, and general lack of a public space that brings people together, with more of a unwelcoming and fenced off character rather than something that joins a community together. And the proposal addresses particularly the New Kirkgate development in Leith, which is a site dominated by one of those large tower blocks and a platform sitting in front of it. And historically, Kirkgate used to be a sort of trade route that connected Leith Walk, which connected again back to the city of Edinburgh with the harbour. And there were multiple public institutions of when Leith was a city in its own right, sitting along this connection to the harbour and along this trade route with loads of shops and public institutions. And the old town hall of Leith used to also sit sort of in this neighbourhood. So obviously superimposed on this was a sort of modernist master plan, which is highlighted here in blue, which created a lot of free public space and got rid of a lot of those historic, much of the historic street pattern. But it then sort of created this open space, which was more fenced off and inaccessible to the public, which resulted in a lot of public space, which is currently sort of unused and not really enjoyed by residents. And at the same time, there have been sort of more recent demolitions and also community additions at the same time. So over the last years, there have been more community interventions that have sort of grown organically and with communities meeting in makeshift places in sort of an effort to make the area more livable and bring residents together. And this is sort of what the proposal of the town hall builds on. And so with this context in mind, the proposal sort of deals with two main questions, which is first of all, that of civic space and viewing it as something that's integral to functioning cities, and obviously the sort of current question of what to do with housing developments that have been neglected over the years, and how to transform them so that residents can enjoy them again without sort of taking the approach of just demolishing everything and starting all over again, which I, in my proposal, conceived as something to be not very productive. And in the same vein, I dealt more with the question of longevity and like not starting from a blank slate. And so designing a structure that is future-proofed and can be reconfigured. So the conceptual approach I took was to design a building in layers and from the outset as something that will evolve over time rather than just presenting it as one final output. So as mentioned before, the proposal introduces a town hall to this fragmented site with a program intersecting the local government and community groups which are already present in the area. And the proposal suggests to both reinstate the physical fabric of Kirkgate as a dense roots relief and also to restore its social function as a site of civic institutions. And so placing a town hall in this area becomes more of a symbolic move that gives back agencies to a territory that has sort of been largely overlooked following the discourse around public housing estates and a sort of perceived political failure and how these estates have been discussed in the media. And so the goal is to transform the territory around Linksview House back into a sort of thriving civic space that actually brings the community together. So from an architectural side, I looked at the sort of open public space and took more of an inspiration from the smaller spaces that are created within these modernist housing blocks and sort of finding their interesting and honestly quite like beautiful nooks and niches, which seemed like more appropriate to human scale rather than those large unused platforms and streets. And so from a sort of site perspective, the town hall divides this open space into smaller squares that are more appropriate to community uses, and then acts as a hinge point between those squares and the routes tying the town hall back into the wider city. And the program, as mentioned before, combines traditional functions of a town hall like the debating chamber and the administrative section with spaces for community groups, giving those community groups that already exist in the area and potential new community groups a platform of advocacy and sort of intersection with the local government to increase the reach of their voices. And the building is structured according to a very simple sort of hierarchy where community groups and commercial and public facilities are placed on the ground floor with administration on top and a debating chamber sitting at the very top in a sort of double height space, with there being a possibility that the administrative parts or like offices and meeting rooms can also be taken over by community groups. So like not drawing those like rigid boundaries, but creating sort of multifunctional spaces for different groups. And so, as I mentioned before, the most essential part of this design intervention was the transformation of this little used public space around Kirkgate into a vibrant public space. And as such, the proposal seeks to safeguard the newly created public space beyond the lifespan of the town hall itself, which I envisioned by designing the building as a system of structural layers, each with its own rate of change. And this allows for the consideration of adaptive reuse and embodied carbon of the material layers from the outset. The main layers of the building are shown in the exploded axonometric on the right, with the most permanent layer being the stone envelope at the bottom, which generates a sort of external presence of the building, and it's part of like the main external load-bearing structure, which is then designed to outlive the building itself, with the possibility that it might frame an external sort of square even after the town hall itself is dismantled. And this was inspired by the sort of ruins of public institutions that can be found all along Kirkgate, which form these really intriguing sort of open rooms, which I aim to emulate with the design itself. And besides the stone, the second load-bearing material used in the building is timber. And while the stone then is used to frame more external permanent spaces and generate a civic presence, the internal timber frame then is used to enclose the internal gathering spaces and divide up rooms, etc., and form the internal character of the building. And I chose a low process approach for the stone, which means that natural extraction marks from the stone are used to express the order of the facade, which then reduces the carbon used to finish the stone itself, and which means that it's mostly just the extraction process and the transport which result in the carbon footprint of the stone. And there is a potential to offset parts or all of the stone embodied carbon by the carbon that is again sequestered in the engineered timber frame. And the concept of reconfigurable building layers allows for the consideration of all stages of construction. So from construction, use, disassembly, adaptation to ruin at the end. And by looking at designing for disassembly, I looked at designing mechanical connections so that the building could be taken apart again into its individual components at the end. And it also allowed me to consider options for adaptive reuse, which would, for example, in this timeline be to take apart the debating chamber, which is double height, and then to transform it into two separate floors, which would enable the creation of a mixed-use office or housing block, for example. But in any case, the final stage of the timeline would be the public square, which was central to the design of the building, and the idea that even after the town hall itself is gone, there will still be a communal gathering ground, which is then enclosed or sort of semi-enclosed by the stone colonnade, with parts of the facade just remaining in place and other parts being relocated in order to form a sort of double colonnade around this little square. So circling back to the town hall itself, the sort of concept of the two material layers with the external stone envelope and the internal timber frame influenced a lot of how I envisioned the building, with there being sort of separate layers through which users would move, and the idea that there might be this inhabited facade and which engages with ideas of sort of openness and transparency in a public building without being too literal about loads of glass being moved and just being, a very literal, transparent building. And this sort of tectonic separation of the thermal envelope around the timber structure from the stone structure also created these offsets in which external spaces can be accommodated within the buildings, for example, colonnades and balconies, which again engage with this idea of outside, and they link back to the survey I conducted initially of those passageways that run under the modernist housing blocks in the area. And while this site strategy itself reinstates the historic route through Kirkgate, which was then lost in the 1960s master plan, this notion of street is also considered at the building scale, with sort of urban typologies like the street and the square being used all throughout the building in a route that then leads up to the debating chamber at the top, which played with the idea of extending the public realm into the building itself through this route, which then, ends and culminates in the debating chamber. Leaving you on this little model image that I spent way too much time on during the semester. So just to reflect on what I've been up to since last year, because obviously it's been a year since the award presentation or the award ceremony. And so obviously I was in my undergrad when I did this project. So what I've been doing in the meantime is taking a year out to work. I've been working at Groves Rains and Leaf, or GRAS as it's now called, which is actually very close to the building site. So I've been driving past it pretty much every morning. And I've worked on some conservation projects in the north of Scotland, which was actually very interesting because I learned loads about traditional stone structures as opposed to this more modern Amin Taha inspired approach that I took in my own project, which was just very, insightful, and I learned a lot throughout the year. And well, obviously the project did pretty well. And so this has sort of opened up some opportunities in terms of being invited to talks like this to present the project. And I've also been invited back to Isala, where I initially did this project to present it as well and give a lecture on it to fourth-year students who were then finishing up their undergrad year. So if anything, this experience has really challenged me to improve my public speaking, which is still a work in progress, but hopefully I'm getting there. And yeah, now I am going back to uni to pursue my master's. So yeah, hopefully that'll all go well. But yeah, that's it for me in terms of my project and my experience since completing it.
Thank you ever so much, Inka. I think we can all agree. I don't know what your public speaking was like before, but it's certainly very good now. So thank you for sharing that with us. A very, very beautiful project. Next, we're going to hear from Karlis, who is was at the Mackintosh School of Architecture and the winner of the RIAS Rowand Anderson Silver Medal for Best Fifth Year Student and the Architecture and Design Sustainable Architect Design Award. The Rowand Anderson Silver Medal for Best Fifth or Final Year Student is open to all fifth or final years only. It's an individual prize, but if students, again, have worked within groups in the fifth year or final year, the group work can be submitted alongside individual work to demonstrate the full breadth of the student's work. While groups cannot win the RIAS Silver Medal, group work is eligible, I should say, for the A&DS Designing and in a Changing Climate Award and the RIAS Andy MacMillan Award. So just do clearly mark up your work either way. So Karlis's project, their pre-landfill, explores a renovation strategy of a vacant hospital in Glasgow by testing the limits of reuse practice of reclaimed materials from demolished buildings, which is essential for tackling the climate emergency and is definitely, I suppose, a different take than we've just had on adaptive reuse. So over to you, Karlis.
Right. Hello. Can everyone see that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Right. Hi, my name's Karlis. Just jump straight into it. Right. Right, yeah. So the synopsis of it sort of came to be already working in fourth year when you're supposed to do like the research project, and I was looking into the sort of the embodied carbon of buildings and the materials themselves. Sort of wanted to continue that in the fifth year, and I was just thinking about how could that play out. I remember about this ad from the Patagonia clothing company, and which basically said don't buy their jackets, and obviously that doesn't really work for us as a business, but that sort of intrigued me. They were looking into the sort of the repair, reuse, recycle sort of part of the market, and I was thinking, could that sort of apply to architecture as well, in the sense that could we still have, instead of business, I mean, architecture is also business, can we also have architecture and construction and design also with things we already have? And so that all set me off to this, to look into the sort of limits, why I can still design and build with what we already have around. And there you can see that that's the final proposal already finished. So, but well, it was quite a long step, quite a long way to get there. So you can see how that happened. And obviously we're all, our site was in Glasgow. Normally in GSA where I was studying, you get to do a lot of other cities around Europe. But at the time, that was due to COVID, we were still based in Glasgow. But I was by that time, I'm originally from Latvia, but having lived here for 5 years, I got to know the city quite well. And I was always interested in this sort of context where there's a lot of the demolitions happening in Glasgow, and you can see statistically in the last pretty much 30 years, half of the demolitions in Scotland, half the official demolitions, doesn't count if people really unofficially demolish things, but half of them happen in Glasgow, and that sort of showed me that, I mean, there's a lot of materials being moved around, maybe wasted a bit more, and could I look into that? And also there's this interesting historic narrative where you can see from the medieval Glasgow, there's not really that much left. I'm from Latvia, Riga. We have our like medieval sort of old town center, and there's lots to see and protect it, but there's not that much in Glasgow, because already back then in Victorian age at times all buildings were demolished because there's all the filth of the city, the big at the height of the empire. They really didn't want that, so they would demolish it, keep moving to the west. Again, in post-war era, a lot of these big high rises going up and demolishing places like around Glasgow, and even these days, I mean, it's quite a topical thing now in Glasgow, in whole Scotland, but especially in Glasgow, a lot of buildings still being demolished, and people raising the awareness of, is that the best way to go around it? But you can see there's this sort of historic narrative going through, and I mean, rightly so. It's often more practical to demolish as it's cheaper, and that sort of also shows the Glasgow sort of working class heritage. There might not be the richest city, and that's how we deal with problems. But to change that, well, we would need like sort of national regulatory change. But well, that's a topic for another discussion. So that's all sort of made me wonder on, I mean, what's available here, what's available in Glasgow, when I really landed on this sort of the 20th century heritage in buildings, as those obviously have the most emissions intensive materials as concrete and steel and glass. So what I ended up doing is just scouring all kinds of demolition company websites, just going around the site. I worked as a delivery driver for many years, and I always used this opportunity of driving around Glasgow just to take pictures of places. I have a whole bunch of collections, tenement close pictures, but also I took pictures of some demolition sites and buildings, and I had a few pictures of that, and just going around Google Maps, and I just landed on these sort of 8 sites around Glasgow that either been recently demolished or soon to be demolished, or was demolished a bit time ago. And I just started sort of cataloging the materials there as close as I could understand them, and built up all these buildings as modules with all the elements, and sort of counted all the elements, and you can see them all sort of here sitting in a as like a catalog. And I ended up making this sort of salvage material catalogs of document. We can see down at the bottom for every building, so like all the elements and numbers and just a little bit of history. And that sort of was my starting point as like a sort of a Lego set of different things I could work with. But obviously I would need a site as well to test this. And so I set out these sort of criteria that I really wanted like quite a problematic site, so I set out these 6 criteria. It has to have like some poor detailing and poor efficiency, quite specific sort of floor planning, so the building is built for just so like one use, and it's generally quite unpopular. Maybe even has like tainted collective memories when the building's been something else. The function of it was has a memory to it. So if the aesthetics are not that attractive, it's quite costly to renovate it, and often with these modern buildings that tend to have like very secluded sort of urban placemaking, or they're like plonked on a big field. So I looked at all kinds of sites from Glasgow, and I landed on the Queen's Mother's Hospital building in York Hill, which is this ginormous, it used to be in the 60s, Europe's most modern maternity hospital. Probably at its height, it was a very regarded building, but obviously by now it's completely vacant, has been for many years. And they were trying to sell it for many years as well, and there hasn't been any buyer coming up, and sort of proving the point that it's very unattractive, unpopular. very problematic building. It's ginormous on a hill, but no one really wants to deal with it. So I thought I'll take the challenge, and I chose that as my site. And obviously I would need a program. As being in fifth year, you're not really given that much thread to follow. So you need to come up with these things yourself. So I just thought, what if I just use the material reuse as a program itself, and make that inform the program. So the building sort of became the manifestation of reuse itself. So you can sort of see the diagram of how the program was set out in the building, where there's a public workshops of inviting people at the edge of the site coming in, and they can flow further into the main spaces where there's a big material swap market. And at the end is the big tower of the building, where it could be like the innovation center, or hosting exhibitions, etc., about material reuse and technology. And at the end of an institute where all this could be research and sort of facilitated. But the main architectural moves. So I mentioned the sort of secluded placemaking. The site is located on a very tall hill with a big sandstone wall around it. And so what I thought is just sort of, as a response to it, sort of embrace the site, embrace the context of being on a hill and using different architectural elements that I'll talk about later, just turning this building into sort of like a big piece of stone, like a big cliff on a hill with a glazed top on bit as like a castle on a hill, and really open, sort of embrace it being there instead of shying away from it. And talking about the materials, so you can see I supplemented, but while doing this sort of cataloging of materials, I was also just trying to think about what could I actually do with them. Obviously you can't take old materials and from somewhere else and just straight up use them on another site. So I ended up developing this sort of pipeline of you can see the construction materials collected on these sites, the waste, the sort of broken ceramics and glass that can still be reused in some other ways, the salvaged brick or brick panels. That was quite a technology used a lot in, I think in Denmark, they just cut massive panels of brick, and that was one of the strategies, or just precast concrete elements themselves, or timber elements or windows. Okay, I could take that, so look at different precedents of how they're processed, either grinded, cut, or there's some fascinating brick salvaging equipment out there, or just grinded up and ended up with sort of already recycled, prepared materials. And then obviously I would need to add a few new materials and some new cement, new mortar, just to join a few things together. So that was the only sort of place where I would add new materials, and ended up there with new products like new cast tiles and all these insulated sort of facade elements and then windows. And you could see how the sort of conceptually would go together. So all the precast concrete sort of frame elements are reused, with the steel being turned into these disassemblable brackets, the new steel frame, and the cut panels sort of hang on to it. And all this was sort of inspired and by the concept of spolia, if you ever heard of that. But I found that fascinating, that in the past the concept of spolia, meaning reusing sort of salvaged waste, basically, it has been around for centuries and centuries. And there's archaeologists have found that there's some pieces that you can see the Ionic capital being reused in the church of St. Peter's Church in Greece. as just a building material between bricks, because back in the day, producing materials was very hard, making bricks, making all these stone carvings. So people really couldn't waste material. Not really that they care about the environment that much back in the day. That's just like a very practical thing to do. And so these days, the concept of spolia is more used just sort of decoratively. You can see a lot, often in places where like a found object during construction or something is being sort of displayed on the facade, just sort of like an architectural feature. So I was thinking, could the spolia concept could be brought back to where it was originally back in the day, when these found materials are actually used as a practical means of reducing waste and emissions in this case. Whoop. Yeah, and here you can see more of the detail, construction detail when it was developed further, built a model, and you can see the brick panels being hung on the precast elements, and ended up you can see in the details of every element that was designed and put into detail has like the sources where they were coming from. So you would say all the steel was coming from 5 power complex. It was like this big power station being brought down that had loads of steel in it, and I think could either reuse some of it, or like the concrete frame, precast concrete frame was coming from I think it was the cooking school for Clyde College. Yeah, so all the details are not only thought about how they come together, but where they come from. And some of the sort of embodied carbon was calculated as well, especially for the glass. Reusing glass can be very, very sustainably impactful, saving up to 95% of CO2. And then I mentioned the big sandstone wall. That was a sort of master planning wise quite a big issue. The site is quite secluded, has like a big sandstone wall around, and what I thought was, could I just open up this wall by puncturing it along the whole estate, turning the wall into actually like a facade, having different commercial spaces there on the old Dumbarton Road. And I would also, this road is located between the very active Byres and Argyle streets, and this is also quite a dead space in between them. And doing this could be a good effective move to just liven up this place and connect these two already really lively streets in Western Glasgow. And as I mentioned before, in the program, one of the idea was, as the program is about reuse, it's really to sort of educate the public of the benefits of quality reuse. There's an existing 19th century laundry building, which is the only leftover building from the original children's hospital. So it's in a sort of a left state there, but I thought it was very beautiful, and that could become sort of the main attraction to people when they come into the site. And that could become the sort of the public workshop, or the institute's findings could be taught to the public. And one interesting sort of architectural move was I proposed inserting a big dividing rammed earth wall, so having a building within a building, and all the earth that was excavated from behind the sandstone wall you just saw in the previous site would not be removed from the site. That's removing earth is quite a big cost in construction. It could be retained on site and reused, say here, as like a rammed earth, insulated rammed earth insert into the existing laundry building with a glass roof. And here you can see all the constructions of the elements I showed before of putting putting them all together into the main building. That's the main tower, where you can see here in the middle is the quite a narrow, hard to work with existing tower, but now with all the salvage elements, I'm able to extend the building, and we're gaining all these large spaces, all this, the auditorium for the innovation center, the library on the top, and sort of a viewing platform. Is a cracking view of the whole Glasgow from the top. And also at the bottom, there's a material swap market, which only where people could bring in their materials they say have lying in their backyard for a long time, and someone else might find a use for it, or they can bring in different tools. Because I live close by, I sometimes do some DIY, and I will often struggle with having some tools, but I don't want to really buy them. So it's another way to encourage people to reuse and upkeep things in their homes if there's availability of tools and materials. And yeah, just overall, this whole project became to just embrace the imperfect materials sort of over immaculate surfaces, and just in general to challenge public's view of decay, and seeing decay more as a sign of sustainability through longevity instead of being something that needs to be torn down. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. And now, last but definitely not least, we are going to hear from Sam from the University of Dundee. Sam was the winner of the A&DS Urban Design Award, as well as the RIAS Andy MacMillan Drawing Award. The A&DS Placemaking Award, which Sam won, is open to all years, and group work and individual work can be submitted. So you can do that as a group or an individual submission. And nominees will be eligible for both the Designing in a Changing Climate Award and the RIAS Andy MacMillan Drawing Award. And just to confirm, all work must be submitted from the student's academic year 22 to 23, and is looking for the work to demonstrate an approach to placemaking issues, master planning, or townscape and urban design, rather than individual buildings within the town or cityscape. As I said, Sam also won the RIAS Andy MacMillan Drawing Award, and that's also open to all years. It's not a separate entry, it's actually judged from the previous categories. So Sam's project, The Open Edge, explores a strategic response to urban sprawl by creating a defined settlement edge for the town of Blairgowrie and Rathay. This project promotes a more compact urban form that redirects future growth inwards and restricts suburban expansions, improving the proximity to essential amenities and preserving the town's productive landscape. So over to you, Sam.
Hi there, thanks very much. I'll just share the screen. Can we see that okay?
I can, and while you're doing that, I'll just remind people to put any questions that occur to them as we go in that chat or Q&A box. I'll hand over to you, Sam.
So yeah, my project was based in Blairgowrie and Rattray. If you're not familiar with it, quite a small rural town. It's just northwest of Dundee, so it has a population of around 10,000 people. So that population was set to increase by 2,000 people by 2028. There was even articles comparing it to the expansion of Mexico City, which seems a bit crazy, but it gives you an idea of what's kind of happening in the town. But the current development and outline plans, they were showing that there'd be up to 1,000 new homes that would be constructed to accommodate this growth. So my project was really looking at how towns grow and expand and how they can kind of retain their identity and their character as this happens, because you get these suburban housing developments that begin to sprawl out and they often don't have a real character to them. They're just kind of soulless places that begin to form, and the town centres begin to kind of get diluted from that. And a quote that I really liked that kind of summarised my project, I guess, was from George Orwell, and he talks about how he doesn't mind towns growing so long as they don't merely spread like gravy over a tablecloth. And unfortunately, that's from my research was kind of the case of Blairgowrie when studying it. So the diagram on the left, this kind of highlights the disconnect between Blairgowrie's town centre and the housing developments to the south here. There's a lack of real like walking, cycling routes to access the basic amenities in the town centre. And this really just encourages people to jump in their car. And even if you're going into Blairgowrie, you'll be as well going to neighbouring retail parks or bigger cities or towns in the surrounding area. And this just starts to kind of make the town centre a bit redundant. And at the moment, you've just got a big loop road that takes you around. You drive past Tesco, and it's just the quality of the public realm really, really suffers as a result. And Blairgowrie's kind of already got a reputation as a commuter town. And this form of suburban development only encourage that further. So on the right-hand side, this map's kind of identifying the gap site, well, the development sites indicated in the local development plan. So these dark grey hatches show the kind of large expanses of land that are set to be consumed with new developments, both mixed use and just residential. So yeah, the idea was like, how can we begin to preserve some of this valuable agricultural land that blur the edges of the town. So the light grey hatches, these are a study that I did, and these just look to identify some alternative smaller gap sites near the edges of the town and at these kind of key road intersections that lead to neighbouring towns and cities such as Perth, Dundee, Cooper and Angus, Alyth, and Glenshee. And I also identified some gap sites within the city centre, much smaller for smaller interventions, both brownfield sites and vacant existing buildings that could potentially be reused to kind of rejuvenate this town centre, which is dying as the death of the high street has happened to towns and cities across Scotland. So this diagram on the left, this kind of maps out, well, this is me beginning to map out how I'm defining the settlement edge of Blairgowrie. And I kind of done that by using the existing natural boundaries formed by forests and agricultural land. And then these gap sites that I've identified along the edges and how they're kind of situated close to these key road intersections. So as you enter the town, you're beginning to get a sense of place. Whereas right now, you're just kind of got these houses that are sprawling out, and there's no real sense of entering into a place with an identity. So on the right, when I was looking at how to form this edge, I kind of decided on 3 key design elements. So the gap sites, these would become new higher density mixed use neighbourhoods that really place a focus on people over cars, very different to the typical suburban housing with the big driveways and people don't really get to know their neighbours. There's no interaction that happens naturally with these kind of developments. I mean, well, it's more difficult to. So yeah, and then the landmarks. So this is number 3 here. The landmarks, these provide destinations along the edge. The buildings that should begin to give the town a sense of identity and character and provide a kind of destination within these neighbourhoods for communities to interact. And then, yeah, and I've kind of got the urban forest. This was what kind of ties them all together. And it's basically a big landscape that would fall around and connect these gap sites together, these little neighbourhoods, and run around the edges of the town. So then I came up with a series of design principles for the developments in the edge should consider, such as enhancement of biodiversity, appropriate mix of amenities, and clearly defined boundaries and access to public space. So these drawings, these begin to illustrate what the town might look like by, say, 2040. The sketch shows how this urban forest creates a green edge to the town, a new kind of biodiverse public realm, connects into each of these neighbourhoods with walking and cycling trails, and just encourages use of active travel methods as opposed to just jumping in your car to get anywhere. And this strategy, this extends into the existing public realm, where the urban forest connects into the town's existing amenities, such as the town centre, schools and existing community buildings. And these are the kind of road networks highlighted in these black lines here. So these provide opportunities to put landmarks on these entrance points and start to define that this is the edge of the town where you're passing from one place to another. So then I kind of looked at these three design elements and zoomed in a bit and looked at what they might look like at a kind of intermediate scale. So this illustration shows a higher density neighbourhood block as opposed to the typical suburban housing we often see. The homes are compact and cars are pushed to the edges. This creates streets that are made for people, which encourages, off-the-cuff social interactions between you and your neighbours. And yeah, this kind of thing is lost in normal suburban housing. So another example of this, so these weren't even site specific, these were just kind of what would the ideals be and how could this look. So yeah, this is like a neighbourhood block that shows a range of different house types, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, some flats, and it just shows how it's centred around a community growing space, a community gathering space, and each of these neighbourhoods would have various breakout spaces like this, because obviously the houses are so compact and much higher density, so it's really important to give these open social spaces for people to engage with their neighbours. So in this scenario, this looks at a landmark. So the landmarks help define the edges of the town. They help reinforce a sense of identity, as I've said. And the community centre kind of acts as a border between Blairgowrie and the wider communities, like a place of exchange. So I guess the urban forest acts as like a boundary for further restriction of expansions and building, whereas the borders are where different communities can interact, and you feel as though you're entering into a place. And then we've got the urban forest. So as I said, that acts as a kind of boundary to restrict the suburban sprawl. And then the new public realm that runs through the urban forest promotes active travel methods and connects each of the neighbourhoods. So you've got, parks, smaller breakout spaces. There's electric bikes that allow you to just jump on, and like many major cities, you can jump on a bike or a scooter and just get your way through the forest and get from one side of the town to the other while going through a nice natural landscape, as opposed to just jumping in your car. So yeah, then I took like a fragment of this edge, and this is kind of your entrance point from Dundee, and this is that landmark I spoke about on the corner. And yeah, I studied that in further detail and just kind of tried to compare what the densities might look like. So you've got the typical suburban streets, big driveways, winding roads, and then these higher density blocks, these start to try and phase out the need for the car. If you're in these neighbourhoods, if you could get to the point where you're sharing and there's only a few electric cars on the outer edges, and then it's predominantly bikes, and you've actually got access to community facilities, it reduces the need for people to jump in their car and drive away from the town and spend their money elsewhere. So this is kind of our group model. It just shows a little portion of the edge that I modelled, and it was part of a kind of wider group strategy in Blairgowrie, where there's a series of different proposals that were mainly focused on individual architectural interventions as opposed to larger projects. But yeah, there was some self-built homes that all tied in together as part of kind of unified group proposal. So these were just little serial vision type things, but I guess it's what would the character of that look like if you don't have the cars? People can actually walk on these streets at the moment you come in, and this is like a motorway leading into the town. You can imagine that surrounding communities could then use this as a gathering point, shops, bakeries, library spaces. I guess it's quite free in the sense it could be whatever it needs to be. This little sign indicates where you can follow along the urban forest to reach different destinations and community landmarks and other neighbourhoods. And this is the idea of the neighbourhood street. So again, it's overlooked. Kids can come out to play, walk your dog, meet your neighbours. it's just, yeah, it reminds me of many European cities as opposed to what we're seeing constructed in Scotland today. And yeah, no sign of the car, and trying to kind of reduce the dependency on that. And this is the idea of the urban forests. As you're coming through, you've got landmarks, you've got these breakout spaces, and it just really gives Blairgowrie a unique identity as a biodiverse town. And it actually goes back to kind of medieval towns. You've got these walled towns and everything's happening within a confined area. And yeah, that was a big inspiration in this project. So what I'm up to now, so I'm working at Studio LBA, so we're based in Kinross. It's got a rural setting. We're in converted Steddon. This is our office spaces here. It's lovely. It's not a lovely day today, I would show everybody, but we've got yeah, some picturesque views near Loch Leven, and yeah, it's a fantastic practice to work for. That we kind of do a range of projects from residential work, but we're kind of moving on to a lot of bigger commercial stuff. But yeah, the small scale residential stuff is what I've been working on predominantly as a kind of prepare for my part 3 and start to get some valuable experience taking projects through various work stages. So these are just quick glimpses of some of the projects. This is a bridal lodge for beside a wedding venue. It's kind of tucked into the landscape, and it's currently moving towards planning, so I'll be working on that. Got Spindy Hideaway. It's a little bird hide on a golf course, and it's a completely off-grid, like little holiday cabin that has panoramic views over the sea. It's a stunning little project, so it's been interesting to work on. And the practice kind of most predominant project at the moment is St Andrews West. So I think there's about 90 units altogether over 2 phases, and it's a housing development that's currently on site. So yeah, it's been really good getting some site experience. And yeah, that's me. So any questions, or if you want to take down my email, feel free.
Thank you ever so much, Sam, and really great to see some of the work that you're doing now in practice. We are running slightly over our time slot because we started late because of our technical difficulties. But I am just going to pass over to Chris Stewart, President of RIAS, who is a judge for last year's awards, just to give us some thoughts and top tips from the judge's perspective. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Tamsie. I'll be very brief and quick because I realize we're running over a little bit, and the things I was going to say are kind of like almost had to kind of rethink. That was just because listening to Sam, Inka, and Karlis almost like took me back last year, and that kind of process that we went through. I mean, I would say that the process for a start is anonymous. When we look at the projects, we don't know whose they are. We don't know where they're from which school. So it's entirely anonymous. And last year I was joined by Morag Bain, Paul Stalin, and Samantha McCabe. And we spent a lot, I mean, although, you know, we will obviously consider any topic whatsoever, kind of the topics of the day were perhaps foremost in our minds. And you kind of perhaps see that in the projects that have kind of come through. Retrofit was obviously something we think a lot about here at the RIAS at the moment, and also perhaps livable neighbourhoods or 20-minute neighbourhoods. And you can see some of those kind of subjects coming through in what actually won. But I must admit, what's kind of like interesting is now at the RIAS is perhaps not necessarily well retrofit is a big thing. But it's perhaps not just that, the materiality of it, but also and you know, how the buildings are put together, recycled, and the embodied carbon, but also the kind of social aspect of it. You know, is there such a thing as social listing? So these are perhaps the topics which are high in our minds at the moment. But as I say, any subject matter, you know, we're going to consider and look at. But it was strange because I was thinking about that and thinking that maybe social listing would be foremost at our approach and consideration to go through. But you know, when looking back, especially at Inka and Karlis's projects, that was a part of it. I'd forgotten that Karlis had actually documented so much of the buildings that had been demolished, but not just the material, but also the social history of the buildings, which I think was fascinating. And at Inka's building, albeit it was new, looks carefully at grassroots projects and used grassroots projects from the community to actually form the way that our town hall would be governed. So these kind of brought back, and so these are the kind of subjects and matter that we would consider. Also, I thought it was great to see the drawings, Sam's drawings. Back then, Paul had a real interest in hand drawing, and again, I think that will be to the fore. But I think it'll be much more. How does that hand drawing interrelate or work with computer drawings? I can imagine that being something we would debate, because there's a real overlap between the two. And I can see Tamsie has turned on her video, so it's kind of perhaps prompts me to bring this to a halt. But please enter. That's the biggest thing. Please enter. And I think it's important to kind of note that this is 2022, 2023 kind of academic year we're looking at. So if there's anybody who is perhaps on a year out, you tell them about that and get their entries in as soon as they possibly can. So really looking forward to it. And thank you again for those fantastic presentations.
Thanks, Chris. I just wondered if I could ask you a question on behalf of those who are attending, which is there anything that you could give people in terms of hints and tips in the style of how people put together their submissions that makes it easier or less easy for the judges to understand and get to grips with the ideas behind the work?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, because a lot of the immediate reaction to the drawing prize, for example, is going to be an image. I am more interested in the drawings that might be analytical, and I think we saw a lot of that in the drawings that were presented. I love the way that Inka had a kind of like growing, kind of like evolving building, which then might even evolve back to something which could be deconstructed and reused. These analytical and I think kind of low, axonometrics and diagrams are really, really important. So include these. It's really essential that we grasp the ideas that you're presenting quickly. So that would be my biggest kind of strongest kind of point to make. And I actually would be kind of in favor, and those kind of drawings might even be the ones that might win a drawing award rather than the image, which I think can perhaps not get to the root of the project quickly. So analytical work, diagrams, what are their ideas? That's what I would say. Make sure they're crystal clear and to front and center of your project. So that would be my biggest hint. Yeah,
I'm not a judge, but I would agree. I love a drawing or a diagram that explains an idea better than words ever could. There's a question that's come in from one of our attendees for our students. I don't know which Inka, Sam or Karlis would like to respond. But the question is, did you have to cut down your work to make it fit the submission criteria? I don't know who would like to answer that. Karlis.
I'd like to say, just if you saw in my presentation, that's basically exactly the 10 slides that I submitted. So you can see the format. That's how I submitted it, meaning instead of just having like, maybe you're gunning for the big best drawing image, you go for it and you can have that as one slide. But I really never looked at it in that way. I just had each page as like a slide, as a spread. Each slide has a topic, so I tried to sort of curate them and cram them in, but I don't think I had to cut down on that much. So you can put text, I put text, you can read through and have the diagrams and then images in a good balance.
Sam, what was your approach?
Yeah, I feel like I had to cut down quite a lot. Mine was quite different because I had a thesis and I'd done loads of little drawings and sketches throughout it. So I guess it was trying to pick out the ones that I felt were really selling the idea and getting to the core of it. And I wasn't actually sure if you could do text or not. So I tried to strip that way back as well and try and let the drawings talk as much as possible. So yeah, I guess mine was pared back quite a bit. So there's obviously different approaches.
And Inka.
Yeah, I would say it was the same in the sense that I took out a lot of drawings, but I mean, there are like things that communicate the same thing. So like I had a full set of like elevations for a building because mine was like more of like a traditional like building design rather than just like doing a whole like concept. of an approach. But yeah, I definitely had like full sets of like elevations and sections that I didn't use, because sometimes it can just like be communicated through more like efficient drawings like axonometrics or like model photos. And I think just like pairing two things together, like, I don't know, pairing together like technical section with like a model photo or something like that can communicate an idea quite well.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I think I mean, I also had loads of drawings I didn't put in, but I don't think I missed out on any sort of the key ideas and topics. So yeah, you don't need to put everything in. It's just so to sit back and imagine someone else looking at them and judging them. Can you understand the main topics, and concepts?
Thank you. We've just had a question in the chat about the maximum number of pages and the balance between group work and everything else. It's a maximum of 10 A3 landscape images, showing a maximum of 2 projects that can be submitted. And just to keep reiterating, because of where we are in the year, this is for work that's been produced in the 2022 to 2023 academic year, so the academic year that's passed. And hopefully everyone can see in the chat, the team have just put up a link that you can click through that should take you straight to finding out more information about each of the awards and each of the criteria. And I suppose to finally iterate that you do need to be an RIAS member to join, an RIAS student member or associate member. Both classes of membership are free, and as well as entitling you to enter this award, you get all sorts of benefits and perks, including 10% off our bookshop in person and online. So definitely worth joining. You also get heavily discounted rates at most of our CPD sessions, and you are able to join our free CPD lunch and learns that happen on a monthly basis. And also particularly for associate members, so those of you who are thinking of sitting your part 3 this year, you do also get access to our practice notes, which is essentially a crib sheet for passing your part 3. So definitely worth making sure that you have access to that going forward. And if you have any questions on any of that, please do email the team and get in touch, and we can make sure that you have access directly through. Really, it's just for me now to thank everyone for taking part. Apologies for the technical difficulties at the beginning. Brilliant, isn't it, technology when it works, and then it can be very annoying when it fails. But I think there's been a really useful session. Great to hear about these 3 projects, the One Last Year award, and really looking forward to seeing everyone's submissions for this year. I'm sure Chris is as well, and has the unenviable task of judging it alongside the rest of the panelists. And as I said, if you have any questions about submission, please do email the team, and we'll make sure that we answer those for you. So thank you to Karlis, thank you Sam, thank you Inka, and thank you Chris.
Thank you,
Bye.
Tamsie.